Somewhere right now, far away from you, a person is standing at a crossroads they haven't told anyone about, not even themselves fully, and that person is the one meant for you. Keep reading, because what comes next might feel like it was written just for your life, like someone has been watching the last few weeks unfold and decided to put words to it. In the last few days, maybe even in the last few hours, the person who belongs with you has been sitting somewhere quiet, wrestling with a thought they're too scared to say out loud, not to their closest friend, not to their family, not even to themselves in the honest way that matters. And that thought is about you. Here's something most people never get to witness. They never see the exact second their person almost broke open. They only see the aftermath, the silence that followed, the distance that crept in, the strange shift in energy that made no sense in the moment, but suddenly clicks into place once you look back on it. I want you to actually sit with that idea for a moment, because part of your mind is already scrambling to shield you from it. That's not a flaw. That's not you being fragile. That's your own psychology doing precisely what it was built to do, protecting you from anything that threatens your sense of stability before you're ready to face it head-on. Carl Jung had a name for this hidden layer. He called it the shadow, the part of a person, and the part of the one they love that stays buried below the surface because it feels too risky, too raw, too honest to bring into the light. It isn't evil, and it isn't something shameful in the way people sometimes assume. It's simply everything a person has learned to hide away in order to feel acceptable, safe, and in control, the feelings too big to display, the needs too vulnerable to voice, the fears too embarrassing to admit even in private. And right now, the shadow side of your person is stirring. Something is rising in them that they can't fully control, can't put into words, and are genuinely afraid to look at directly. This is exactly where things get tricky. The human brain hates not knowing. Given the choice, it will invent a story, any story, rather than sit inside the discomfort of uncertainty. So think about what your own mind is doing as you read this. It's already reaching for explanations. Is it doubt? Is it fear? Are they hiding something from you? Notice how quickly your brain jumped toward an answer instead of just letting the not knowing exist for a second. That urge, that itch to resolve tension immediately is the very same urge your person is battling right now, except they're fighting it in relation to you. Freud gave a name to what's happening under their surface too. He called it repression, the oldest defense the mind ever learns, older even than language itself. When a feeling is too enormous, too destabilizing to face directly, the mind doesn't erase it. It buries it. It shoves it down into the unconscious, where it doesn't vanish. It waits. It ferments. And eventually it leaks out sideways through behavior that seems to have nothing to do with its real source. A sudden coldness, an unexplained need for space, a short temper over something insignificant. None of that is random. Those are symptoms. They're the pressure of something buried, trying to find a crack to escape through. What they will never admit out loud is that what they're repressing isn't rejection of you. It's the complete opposite. It's a measure of just how much you matter to them. Because here's something almost nobody says plainly. The people who frighten us most aren't the ones we don't care about. They're the ones with the power to completely undo us. Sit with that sentence again, because it changes everything. If your person didn't feel something enormous toward you, there would be nothing worth repressing in the first place. Repression only exists to guard the psyche against something powerful enough to threaten its balance. Indifference doesn't need armor, only intensity does. So if you've noticed distance, if you've noticed silence, if you've noticed a version of them that suddenly feels just out of reach, understand what you might actually be watching. Not the absence of feeling, the overwhelming presence of it, wearing a disguise. Most people miss this entirely. Most people read withdrawal as disinterest because that's the easiest, least painful story to tell themselves. But easy explanations are rarely the true ones when it comes to the unconscious mind. The unconscious doesn't run on logic. It runs on symbol, on defense mechanisms, on contradiction. And right now, your person may be trapped inside a contradiction so intense it's splitting them in two, wanting closeness and dreading it in the very same breath, craving your presence while simultaneously pulling away from it, needing you and fighting that need like it's a weakness they can't afford to reveal. That silence changes everything, because silence is never truly empty. Silence is information. Silence might be the loudest expression of an internal war that hasn't found its words yet. When your person goes quiet, they aren't doing nothing. Internally, they're doing everything at once, negotiating with fear, wrestling with old wounds, running simulation after simulation of every possible way this could go, trying to guess whether opening up to you would heal them or wreck them. Let's go a layer deeper, because this stops being only about them here. This becomes about you too, and about the part of yourself you might be dodging by keeping your attention locked entirely on them. Jung believed the people who move us most intensely often act as mirrors, not literal ones, but psychological ones, reflecting back the exact parts of ourselves we haven't yet come to terms with. If your person is going through something that terrifies them, ask yourself honestly, is there a version of that same terror living somewhere inside you too, one you've been avoiding by staying fixated on theirs? That's often when the mind turns on people. And sometimes it turns on you as well. Here's an uncomfortable truth almost nobody says out loud about this topic. Sometimes we obsess over our person's inner crisis because it gives us an escape from our own. It's simpler to wonder what they're hiding than to ask what we ourselves are hiding. It's easier to dissect their silence than to sit with our own unprocessed fear of being abandoned, of not being enough, of being loved and then losing it all. So ask yourself something uncomfortable, not about them, about you. When you picture them pulling away, what's the very first feeling that rises in your chest? Is it concern for them, or is it fear for yourself? Those aren't the same thing, even though they love to disguise themselves as one another. If it's fear for yourself, that's not something to be ashamed of. That's simply human. But it does mean something worth paying attention to. It might mean that what you're calling worry about your person is actually an old wound of yours getting triggered. Maybe a wound left by someone who walked away without ever explaining why. Maybe a wound from a childhood where love felt conditional, where affection could vanish without warning, where you learned early that closeness always carried the risk of sudden, unexplained loss. And here's where things get complicated, because if that wound is alive in you right now, it will warp how you read everything they do. One unanswered message will feel like abandonment. One slightly shorter phone call will feel like rejection. Your nervous system, shaped by old pain, will respond to something happening today as though it were the thing that happened back then, projected onto the present. This isn't weakness. This is simply how the human brain protects itself. It generalizes danger so it can react faster the next time. But it also means that right now you might be fighting two battles simultaneously, theirs and your own, without even realizing you've fused them into one. Let's push even further, because we haven't reached the true center of this yet. What if your person's crisis and your own unspoken fear aren't two separate events at all, but two expressions of the same shared unconscious pattern? Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, moments where inner psychological states line up with outer events in a way that feels far too precise to be chance. Two people who are bonded closely enough often start destabilizing at the same time, not because one is causing the other, but because they're tangled together inside a shared psychological field. Their crisis stirs something in you. Your unresolved material stirs something in them. It isn't coincidence, it's resonance. Most people never explore this deeply enough to understand it, because doing so demands the one thing the ego resists more than anything else: honest self-examination with no escape hatch. So let's not take the exit. Let's keep going. What is your person actually afraid of, underneath all the surface-level worry? Not the shallow fear of will this work out, not am I making the right choice. Beneath that, there's almost always a deeper fear, one that existed long before you did. The fear of losing themselves inside a bond that feels bigger than they can control. Real intimacy, the kind that reaches all the way into the unconscious, the kind that feels like recognition rather than a decision, doesn't only threaten loneliness, it threatens identity itself. Think about what it actually means to be truly known by another person. Not liked, not admired, known. Seen in the exact places you've spent your whole life hiding. The contradictions, the wounds, the parts of yourself you've quietly edited out of public view. Being genuinely known by someone is one of the most exposing experiences a human being can go through. And your person may be standing right at that threshold now, right on the edge of being fully seen by you. Every defense mechanism they've built since childhood is firing off at once, urging them to retreat before they get lost inside that closeness. That's what they never say out loud. Not to you. Not to their closest friends. Sometimes not even to themselves, in the quiet moments when they're alone with their thoughts. Because admitting it means admitting vulnerability. And to a psyche that's been hurt before, vulnerability doesn't register as intimacy. It registers as danger. It doesn't matter how kind you've been, how patient, how safe you've tried to make things feel. The nervous system doesn't grade on effort. It grades on pattern, on repetition, on whatever it learned long before you arrived, and it will keep sounding the alarm until enough time passes for it to learn something new. Let's slow down here because there's a layer people usually skip past too fast. Part of what makes this kind of crisis feel so disorienting to watch is that it doesn't move in a straight line. It's not one clean feeling moving toward one clean resolution. It's cyclical. Some days they seem closer than they've ever been, saying things that make your chest tighten with hope. The next day they feel 1,000 miles away, and you're left replaying every word, hunting for the exact moment things went wrong. But here's the truth. There was no single moment. What you're watching isn't a story with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's an oscillation. Approach, retreat, approach, retreat. The exact rhythm of an unconscious mind trying to negotiate between desire and fear at the same time, unable to fully commit to either because both feel equally true. Jung described this as the tension of opposites, the idea that psychological growth doesn't come from picking one side and eliminating the other, but from holding both extremes at once until something new is forced into existence by the friction between them. Your person isn't torn between wanting you and not wanting you. They're torn between the version of themselves that learned to survive by staying guarded and the version of themselves that's starting to believe, maybe for the first time, that staying guarded around you might not be necessary anymore. That belief terrifies people more than almost anything else, because it means dismantling a defense system built over years, sometimes decades, one painful brick at a time. What they never admit is how draining it is to live inside that back and forth, to want to reach out and pull back in the same breath, to type a message and delete it, to almost say the real thing and say something smaller instead. This isn't dishonesty. It's survival, wearing the costume of hesitation. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that hesitation, wondering why someone who clearly feels something can't just say it plainly, understand this: plain honesty requires a level of psychological safety that not everyone has had the chance to build yet. Some people learned early that saying the true thing out loud got them hurt, dismissed, or left behind. So the mind adapts. It starts speaking in fragments, mixed signals, silence. Not because the feeling isn't real, but because the feeling has never once felt safe enough to say directly. Let's talk about what's happening in their body right now, because this isn't just psychological theory, it's physical reality too. As closeness with you deepens, their body doesn't just experience warmth, it experiences activation, a subtle, often unnoticed stress response, the same neural pathways that once fired during earlier moments of relational danger lighting up again. Their nervous system can't always tell the difference between this person might leave me and this person might overwhelm me. Both get flagged as danger by a system shaped by old attachment wounds. And this is where the whole pattern becomes almost predictable once you know what to look for. Closeness increases, fear increases, and instead of communicating that fear directly, the mind reroutes it into behavior, distance, irritability, sudden unavailability, second-guessing the entire foundation of the relationship. Not because the foundation is weak, but because it's strong enough to rattle walls that were built long before they ever met you. Most people don't see this. Watching their person withdraw, they assume the connection is falling apart. In reality, the opposite might be happening. The bond might be working so well that it's activating every unresolved fear the other person has been avoiding their whole life. But here's the truth. None of this is permanent. Psychological patterns aren't life sentences. They're maps of old survival strategies that have simply outlived their usefulness. The fact that your person is struggling right now doesn't mean the connection is broken. It might mean the opposite. It might mean the bond has finally reached deep enough to touch a place inside them that's never been touched before. Let's go even further because there's another layer underneath this one. Freud believed much of adult behavior comes from something called repetition compulsion, an unconscious pull to recreate unresolved emotional patterns from the past, usually with the hidden hope of finally resolving them differently this time. If your person's early relationships taught them that closeness leads to abandonment, betrayal, or the loss of themselves, some part of their unconscious might be testing you right now without even realizing it. Not on purpose, not manipulatively, instinctively, creating distance just to see whether you'll vanish the way others once did or whether you'll stay in a way no one ever has before. That's one of the more uncomfortable truths in all of psychology. We often unconsciously recreate the exact pain we're most desperate to escape because some part of us is still trying to rewrite how the story ends. That silence changes everything because inside that silence, a test is quietly running, not one you were told about, not one with visible rules. An unconscious test run by a part of the mind that doesn't operate on logic, asking the same question over and over, is this safe enough to stay in, or will it end the way everything else did? Now here's where the pressure builds to its peak, because I need you to understand something most people never say clearly. You cannot pass this test by chasing. You cannot pass it by over-explaining. You cannot pass it by logically convincing an unconscious fear that it's wrong, because the unconscious doesn't respond to logic. It responds to consistency, patience, and the absence of the exact reaction it's most afraid of provoking. If their deepest fear is abandonment, panic from you will confirm it. If their deepest fear is losing themselves, pressure from you will confirm it. If their deepest fear is being too much, urgency from you will confirm it. That's when their own mind turns against them, because the very thing they're afraid will happen becomes more likely the harder they try to protect themselves from it, and the harder you try to prevent it. This is the paradox sitting right at the center of the crisis your person is facing. Their fear of loss might be the exact thing pulling them toward the loss they fear. Their fear of losing themselves might be the exact thing pushing them away from the one connection capable of helping them find themselves. And your fear of losing them might be the exact thing pushing you into behavior that widens the distance instead of closing it. I want you to actually feel the weight of that before we move on, because this is the turning point everything has been building toward. The uncomfortable truth is this: neither of you is doing anything wrong. You're both responding exactly the way two nervous systems shaped by past pain are wired to respond when they run into something real enough to matter. Your person's crisis isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign of significance. Nothing this intense gets activated over something that doesn't matter. The mind doesn't go to war over things it doesn't care about. So what do you actually do with all of this? Not perform a certainty you don't feel. Not chase clarity that isn't ready to be handed over yet. Not force resolution onto a process that's still unfolding beneath the surface, in places neither of you can fully see. What you do is become the one steady variable inside their internal chaos, the one thing that doesn't confirm their fear. You become steady where their history has been unstable. You become present without becoming desperate. You become someone whose care doesn't collapse under pressure, and whose presence doesn't disappear the moment things get complicated. Not because you're passive, not because you're pretending nothing's happening, but because you understand, on a level most people never reach, that what they're going through has almost nothing to do with logic, and almost everything to do with the oldest, most unresolved parts of who they are. And here's the final layer, the one that ties everything together. The reason this connection feels different, the reason it feels less like a choice and more like recognition, is because bonds like this don't just switch on romantic feeling. They switch on everything unfinished in both people at once. That isn't a flaw in the connection. That's the entire point of it. Some bonds exist specifically to drag buried material to the surface, not to destroy the relationship, but to force both people to finally face what they've been avoiding for years, sometimes for decades, sometimes their whole lives. Your person's crisis was never separate from your own story. It never was. It's one thread inside a shared, unconscious pattern the two of you are living out at the same time, whether either of you has the language for it yet or not. What they're wrestling with right now isn't some random event. It's the natural, almost inevitable result of two people colliding with enough force to expose what neither one of you could have seen alone. Most people will read all of this and think it's purely about their person. It isn't only about them. It's about the part of you that recognized a little too much of yourself in every line. It's about the fear you've been quietly relabeling as concern. It's about the old wound you've been projecting onto today's silence. It's about the test you didn't even realize you were also taking. Drop the illusion for a second. Stop telling yourself this is only their crisis to sort out alone. Stop pretending your only job is to sit quietly on the sidelines while they work themselves out. And stop pretending your own fear, your own history, your own unconscious patterns have nothing to do with what's unfolding between the two of you. Because here's the final truth this entire message has been building toward. The biggest thing your person is facing right now isn't really a decision about you. It's a confrontation with themselves. And you happen to be the mirror standing close enough to make that confrontation impossible to avoid. That isn't a burden. That isn't a curse. Whether either of you can fully see it yet or not, that is one of the rarest, most transformative things two people can offer each other. The chance to finally stop running from the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. There's one more layer worth naming before we close, because it explains why this particular bond feels different from every other relationship either of you has known. Jung believed every person carries an inner figure representing the opposite psychological polarity within themselves, an inner image of wholeness we unconsciously search for in another person. When we meet someone who seems to activate that image with uncanny precision, the encounter doesn't feel like meeting a stranger. It feels like remembering someone, that sense of recognition, the feeling that this connection is somehow older than the actual time you've known each other, isn't a mystical accident. It's projection. the unconscious mind casting its own hidden sense of wholeness onto another human being and mistaking the reflection for the source itself. This is exactly why bonds like this feel so uniquely destabilizing. You're not simply relating to a person, you're relating to a symbol your own psyche has built and layered on top of a real, flawed, complicated human being who could never perfectly match the image projected onto them. Every bond like this eventually reaches a moment where that projection cracks, where the idealized image gives way to the actual person underneath, contradictions and all. That moment often gets mistaken for falling out of love. In truth, it's usually the opposite. It's the beginning of real love, the kind that survives actually seeing someone clearly instead of loving a symbol standing in their place. That's often the final way the mind turns against them, not through fear of losing you, but through fear of loving you without the illusion. Fear of choosing the real, imperfect, unpredictable version of you instead of the idealized image that felt safer to love because it could never disappoint. And that is very often the true content of the crisis your person is facing. Not whether they want you, whether they can survive wanting the real you, fully seen, illusions collapsed, nothing left to hide behind. Push past the discomfort of that thought instead of retreating from it, because this is the exact moment most people would normally close this out and go back to distraction instead of sitting with what they've just understood. Don't do that. Let the realization finish landing. Let yourself fully feel what it means that the person shaking your sense of certainty right now might be doing so not because the bond is failing, but because it has finally become real enough to matter. So the next time you feel that distance, that silence, that strange, unexplainable shift, don't panic and don't retreat into old defenses of your own. Recognize it for what it actually is. Not the end of something, the beginning of the only kind of closeness that was ever going to be real in the first place, the kind that survives contact with the truth. And that's the truth almost nobody tells you about a bond this deep. It was never going to be easy. It was only ever going to be worth it.